April 1942. Combined Operations Headquarters, Richmond Terrace, London. Rain streaks the blackened windows of the converted government building, blurring the barrage balloons that hang like sentries over the Capitol. Inside, the air is thick with cigarette smoke and the stale smell of coffee that has gone cold hours ago. Vice Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten stands before a massive wall map of the English Channel. His eyes aren't focused on the coastlines, but on the terrifying stretch of blue water in between. The room is silent, save for the rhythmic clicking of a teleprinter in the hallway and the distant dull thud of anti-aircraft practice. Mountbatten turns to the gathered logistics experts and engineers, his expression grim. He knows that getting men onto the beaches of France is only half the battle. Keeping them there is the nightmare. "Gentlemen," Mountbatten says, his voice cutting through the haze, "an army marches on its stomach, but a modern army moves on petrol. If we land in Europe, we will need fuel. Not in cans, not in drums, but in a continuous flow." He taps the map with a pointer. "The Germans know this. They will destroy every port we capture. They will bomb every tanker that approaches the shore. If we rely on ships, the invasion stalls in 3 days. If we stall, we are pushed back into the sea." He pauses, letting the gravity of the situation settle on the shoulders of the men in the room. "So," Mountbatten continues, "we must find a way to pump the fuel across the channel, under the water." A murmur of disbelief ripples through the room. A civil engineer clears his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his uniform. "With respect, sir, the channel is notorious. The currents, the tides, dragging a rigid steel pipe across the seabed while under fire. It would tear apart before we reach the midpoint. It's an engineering impossibility." Mountbatten's eyes narrow. "Then do not use a rigid pipe. Find another way, but get it done." 2 weeks later, the Petroleum Warfare Department. Geoffrey Lloyd, the Minister for Petroleum, sits in his office, rubbing his temples. The impossible order from Mountbatten has landed squarely on his desk. The standard methods have all been rejected. Floating pipes would be bombed by the Luftwaffe. Submerged steel pipes would buckle and break in the harsh currents of the channel. Enter Arthur Clifford Hartley. Hartley is not a military man. He is the chief engineer of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. He walks with the confident stride of a man who has spent his life solving problems in the harsh deserts of the Middle East, not the polished halls of Whitehall. He is known for his eccentricity, his refusal to accept it can't be done, and his ability to see mechanics where others see obstacles. Lloyd explains the dilemma. "We need a pipeline, Arthur, but we can't lay it like a pipeline. We have to lay it quickly across 30 miles of open ocean, unseen by the enemy, and it has to be flexible enough to survive the drop from the ship to the seabed." Hartley listens, his mind already racing. He looks out the window, watching the city of London functioning despite the war. His gaze falls on a heavy spool of telegraph cable being loaded onto a lorry. "Cable," Hartley mutters. "I beg your pardon?" Lloyd asks. Hartley turns back, a spark in his eye. "We don't need a pipe, Minister. We need a cable, a hollow cable." It sounds absurd, but Hartley explains his logic. Submarine telegraph cables have been laid across the Atlantic for decades. They are flexible, durable, and can be spooled onto the decks of ships. They are designed to withstand the crushing pressure of the deep and the corrosive salt water. If we take the core out of a standard Siemens telegraph cable, Hartley says, using his hands to shape the air, and replace the copper wiring with a hollow lead tube, We could pump petrol through it just as easily as we send a telegram. May 1942. The Siemens Brothers Works, Woolwich. The factory floor is a cacophony of grinding metal and shouting foremen. Under the strictest secrecy, Hartley has commissioned a prototype. The workers know they are building something specifically for the war effort, but the exact purpose is compartmentalized. They take a 2-inch diameter lead pipe, soft, malleable lead, and begin the process of armoring it. First, layers of paper tape and cotton tape soaked in asphalt. Then, 4 layers of high-tensile steel tape wound spirally to prevent the lead from bursting under the internal pressure of the fuel. Finally, a heavy layer of galvanized steel wires to protect it from the abrasion of the seabed, all wrapped in a final coat of jute. It looks like a giant prehistoric snake. They call it the HAIS cable, Hartley, Anglo-Iranian, Siemens. But looking at it on a factory floor is one thing. Putting it under pressure is another. The Chatham Reach, River Medway, May 10, 1942. A small, nondescript post office cable ship, the HMS Alert, idles in the gray waters of the Medway. On its deck sits a massive drum wound with several hundred yards of the new HAIS cable. Hartley stands on the deck, his coat flapping in the wind. Beside him are the skeptics from the Admiralty. They are watching closely, expecting the lead liner to collapse or the steel tape to snap the moment the cable bends over the stern. "Pay it out," the captain orders. The drum begins to turn. The heavy black cable slithers over the stern wheel and vanishes into the dark water. The ship moves forward, laying the line along the riverbed. Once the loop is complete, the ends are connected to high-pressure pumps on the shore. "Bring it up to 600 pounds per square inch," Hartley commands. The pumps whine, the gauges twitch. 100 psi, 300 psi, 500 psi. If the lead lining has kinked during the laying process, the cable will blow apart. If the steel tape isn't strong enough, the pipe will balloon and burst. The needle hits 600, then 700. "Holding steady, sir," a technician shouts over the roar of the engine. Hartley walks over to the outlet valve. He signals the operator. The valve is cracked open and a jet of water shoots out with the force of a fire hose. It works. But as the cheers go up from the crew, Hartley is already doing the math in his head. This was a few hundred yards in a calm river. The English Channel is 30 miles of turbulent hell. And a 2-inch pipe won't deliver nearly enough fuel for an invasion force. They need to go bigger. They need to go longer. And they need a way to carry not just hundreds of yards, but miles of this heavy lead-lined beast without capsizing the ship carrying it. As the HMS Alert turns back toward the dock, Hartley looks out at the horizon. The engineering fantasy is now a reality, but the logistical nightmare has only begun. The Germans are watching the channel like hawks. How do you hide a pipeline operation in plain sight? You don't just need a ship. You need something the world has never seen before. December 1942. The Ministry of Fuel and Power, London. The euphoria of the River Medway's success has evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard math of wartime economics. Hartley stands before the production board, a ledger open on the table. "It works," Hartley insists, his fist resting on the table. "The HAIS cable works." "It requires lead, Mr. Hartley," a supply officer retorts, not looking up from his notes. "Tons of it. To spam the channel with enough lines to support an invasion force, you would strip the roof off every church in England and still come short. We simply do not have the strategic reserves. The room falls silent. The HAIS cable, the engineering miracle, is dead in the water, not because of physics, but because of supply chains. Sitting quietly in the corner is B.J. Ellis, the chief oil fields engineer of the Burma Oil Company. He watches the argument unfold, sketching idly on a notepad. While Hartley is a master of adaptation, Ellis is a purist. He knows oil fields. He knows steel. "We don't need lead," Ellis says softly. The room turns to him. "We use steel pipes," Ellis continues, his voice gaining strength. "Standard 3-inch steel piping. We have plenty of it." "Steel?" Hartley asks, skeptical. "You can't spool steel. It's rigid. It'll snap the moment you try to wind it onto a ship's drum." Ellis stands up, sliding his sketch across the table. "Not if the drum is big enough. If the diameter is large, say 30 or 40 feet, the steel won't kink. It will flex. It has a spring to it. We weld the pipes into 4,000-foot lengths on shore, wind them onto a giant floating spool, and tow it across the channel. The spool unrolls. The pipe lays flat, like thread from a bobbin." The men stare at the sketch. It looks less like a ship and more like a floating factory accident. A massive hollow steel cylinder, nearly 40 feet in diameter and 60 feet long, nicknamed the Conun, short for conundrum, because when the Navy first saw the blueprints, they couldn't figure out what on earth it was. Lieutenant Commander Trebby Heel stands on the bridge of a tugboat, looking up at the Conun. It towers over his vessel, a rusted, imposing wall of metal floating in the water. It looks ungainly, impossible to steer, and dangerous. "We're supposed to tow that?" his first mate asks, spitting into the water. "It'll drag us backward as soon as the tide turns." "Orders are to tow it to the Isle of Wight for trials. If it sinks, we cut the line and run." The trial begins. The tugs strain, their engines churning the water into white foam. The massive drum, wound with miles of the rigid Hamel steel pipe, begins to rotate. As they move into open water, the pipe peels off the drum. It hits the water with a splash and sinks. The skeptics hold their breath, waiting for the pipe to snap or the drum to capsize. But the physics hold. The steel pipe, despite being rigid metal, behaves exactly as Ellis predicted. The massive diameter of the drum keeps the curve gentle enough to prevent kinking. As it hits the seabed, the tension releases and the pipe lays flat. June 1943, near the Isle of Wight. The trials are escalating. They now have 2 working systems. Hartley's flexible lead-lined HAIS cable, for which they have scraped together enough lead for vital connections, and Ellis's steel Hamel pipe wound on the giant Conundrums. But the channel is not a laboratory. During a full-scale rehearsal, a conundrum drum, fully loaded with 70 miles of pipe, is being towed in choppy waters. The sheer mass of the object, over 1,600 tons, creates a terrifying momentum. On the tow line, the tension gauges scream into the red. The conundrum begins to oscillate, swinging wildly behind the tugs like a pendulum of doom. "Slack the line!" the tug captain screams. Too late. The momentum of the spinning drum overtakes the speed of the tugs. The steel pipe, unspooling too fast, begins to whip. For a terrifying moment, the steel snake thrashes on the surface of the water, threatening to slice through the hull of the escort vessels. Then, with a groan of tearing metal, the brake on the drum seizes. The conundrum lurches to a halt, wallowing in the waves. The test is a failure. But in the failure, they learn the critical lesson: speed control. They cannot just drag it, they have to finesse it. They need more powerful tugs, precise coordination, and nerves of steel to pilot these floating bombs across the channel. August 1943, Force Pluto headquarters. The decision is made. They will use both systems. The HAIS cable is easier to handle but harder to produce. The Hamel pipe is cheap and plentiful but terrifying to transport. They need a base of operations, a place to hide these massive drums and miles of cable from German reconnaissance planes. They choose the Isle of Wight, but they can't just leave giant spools sitting on the beach. To the German eye, this must look nothing more than a sleepy coastal resort. The engineers arrive at Sandown Bay on the Isle of Wight. They take over a holiday bungalow and a rundown ice cream factory. Under the cover of darkness, they begin to gut the buildings. Inside the ice cream factory, they install high-pressure pumps capable of pushing fuel 70 miles. On the outside, it still says ice cream. The disguise is almost comical, but the stakes are deadly serious. If the Luftwaffe realizes that this sleepy island is the aorta of the upcoming invasion, they will bomb it into oblivion. Hartley walks the perimeter of the pumping station. He checks the camouflage netting. He checks the dummy windows painted on the concrete blast walls. "It looks like a tea shop," an aide comments. "Good," Hartley replies, looking south towards France, "because we're about to serve them a very hot drink." The engineering is done. The prototypes are built. Now they must wait for the invasion. But as D-Day approaches, a new problem emerges. They have the pipes, they have the pumps, but they don't have a port in France to plug into yet. And the ocean floor isn't flat. It's a graveyard of shipwrecks and jagged rocks waiting to slice their lifeline in two. August 12, 1944. The English Channel, 15 miles off the coast of France. The sun beats down on the steel deck of HMS Latimer. She is not a warship, but a converted collier, her belly filled not with coal, but with thousands of tons of the HAIS lead cable, coiled like the intestines of a giant beast. Captain D.J. Rumbelow grips the railing of the bridge. His eyes are fixed on the stern. "Speed," he barks. "5 knots, steady," comes the reply. Behind the ship, the black cable slides relentlessly into the water. It has been paying out for 10 hours straight, 10 hours of holding their breath. If the ship goes too fast, the cable snaps. If it goes too slow, the cable kinks and blocks the flow. If a German U-boat or E-boat spots them, they are a sitting duck, tethered to the seabed, unable to maneuver. They are racing against a different kind of clock. On the mainland, General Patton's Third Army is breaking out of Normandy. They are moving faster than anyone predicted, tearing through the French countryside. But the faster they move, the faster they burn fuel. The Red Ball Express, the truck convoys bringing petrol from the beaches, is at its breaking point. Tanks are sitting idle in fields, engines silent, waiting for gas that isn't coming. Rumbelow knows this. The men on board know this. The giant black snake slipping into the water isn't just plumbing, it's the heartbeat of the liberation. Cherbourg Peninsula, the beach at Kirkeville. A team of Royal Engineers stands waist-deep in the surf. They are watching the horizon. "There!" a sergeant shouts, pointing. A small barge, towed by the Latimer, separates from the main ship. It carries the shore end of the cable. The barge grounds on the sand. Men rush forward, dragging the heavy, armored end of the line up the beach. They wrestle it toward the manifold station, a camouflaged concrete bunker waiting to receive the connection. "Hook it up! Move!" Spanners the size of arms are used to bolt the flange of the undersea cable to the landline. The connection is made.
Back on the Isle of Wight, Sandown pumping station. The phone rings in the control room of the ice cream factory. An officer picks it up. He listens for a moment, then hangs up. He looks at the engineer manning the main pump control. They're connected at Cherbourg. Start the pumps. The engineer nods and throws the switch. The massive reciprocating pumps shudder to life. Deep inside the HAIS cable, sitting on the dark, silent floor of the English Channel, the pressure builds. The petrel begins to move. It travels at a walking pace, pushing through 30 miles of darkness, past shipwrecks and sea mines. August 14th, 1944, Cherbourg. The receiving team watches the pressure gauge. The needle flickers. It rises. We have flow. A cheer erupts, but it is quickly silenced by the roar of an engine. A jeep tears up to the station. An American quartermaster jumps out, looking exhausted and covered in dust. "Is it true? Do you have the gas?" The British engineer points to the filling station they've rigged up. "Fill her up, Yank!"
The quartermaster stares at the nozzle. This fuel didn't come from a tanker. It came from under the sea. But the victory is short-lived. October 1944. The Straits of Dover. The war has moved. The Allies have pushed far beyond Normandy. Cherbourg is now too far behind the front lines to be effective. The armies are in Belgium, pushing toward the Rhine. They need fuel closer to the action. They need a new line. The shortest route, Dungeness in England to Boulogne in France. This is where the Conundrums come into their own. The massive floating drums wound with the rigid steel Hamel pipe are deployed. It is a spectacle of industrial might. Tugs strain against the currents of the Straits of Dover, towing the skyscraper-sized spools. But the channel is unforgiving. As Conundrum 1 nears the French coast, the weather turns. The waves pick up, slamming into the drum. The tugs lose steerage. "She's drifting!" the tug captain screams. "She's drifting onto the minefield!" The massive drum, carrying 70 miles of steel pipe, is pushed inexorably toward a known German naval minefield off the coast of Calais. The crew on the tugs watch in horror. If the drum hits a mine, the explosion will be catastrophic. "Cut the line! Cut it now!" The order is given. The tow rope is severed. The tugs peel away, engines screaming, fleeing the danger zone. The Conundrum, now a ghost ship, drifts silently into the gray mist. Moments later, a dull, thumping explosion echoes across the water. A plume of water rises. Then, silence. The drum is lost. The pipe is lost. Hartley receives the news in London. He doesn't flinch. "Send the next one," he orders, "and tell the tug captains to steer into the wind this time." They have no choice. The appetite of the Allied war machine is insatiable. For every line that breaks, for every pump that fails, they simply build another. They lay lines by day and by night. By late 1944, there isn't just one line, there are 17. A web of lead and steel now binds England to France. They call it the Dungeness net. January 1945. Eindhoven, the Netherlands. The winter is bitter. The Battle of the Bulge has just ended. The Allies are preparing for the final push into Germany. In a depot near the front, a British soldier fills a jerry can from a massive storage tank. The fuel is cold, smelling of raw power. He pauses, looking at the liquid. He wonders where it came from. He assumes a tanker brought it to Antwerp, then a truck brought it here.
He has no idea that the petrol in his hand began its journey in Liverpool, was pumped to the Isle of Wight, traveled under the ocean floor through a pipe made by a telegraph company, surfaced in Boulogne, and was pushed through overland pipes to where he stands now. Operation Pluto is delivering over 1 million gallons of fuel per day. The eccentric idea is now the lifeblood of the Western Front. But as the war winds down, the engineers face one final, unexpected enemy: themselves.
May 8th, 1945. Dungeness Pumping Station. The teleprinter chatters one final joyous message. V-E-Day. Outside, the gulls cry over the shingle beach. Inside the camouflaged bungalows, the noise is deafening, as it has been for months. The massive pumps have been hammering away, day and night, sending a relentless river of petrol under the English Channel to the heart of Germany. But today, the order is different. "Shut it down," the station commander says. His voice is quiet, almost lost in the din. The engineer reaches for the heavy iron wheel on the main steam valve. He turns it. The hiss of steam dies away. The rhythmic thumping of the pistons slows. Thud, 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 and then silence. For the first time in a year, the floor stops vibrating. The silence is heavy, ringing in their ears. Operation Pluto is over. In the end, the pipe dream delivered. It pumped over 172 million gallons of fuel to the Allied forces. It allowed the rapid advance across the Rhine. It freed up thousands of supply ships to carry food and ammunition instead of dangerous jerry cans. But as the celebrations erupt in London and Paris, a new reality sets in. The war is won, but Britain is bankrupt. The country is in ruins, and sitting on the bottom of the English Channel is a fortune in raw materials: lead, steel, copper. The Treasury looks at the books. The HAIS cables alone contain enough lead to re-roof half of London's bombed-out houses. The Pluto lines are no longer a lifeline, they are a gold mine. September 1946. The Channel. The HMS Latimer is back, but she isn't laying cable anymore. She is eating it. The crew stands at the rail, watching the grapple hook drag the seabed. It catches. The winch screams. Slowly, dripping with slime and rusted barnacles, the HAIS cable breaks the surface. It looks like the carcass of a sea monster. They haul it onto the deck. Men with cutting torches and saws attack it, stripping away the steel armor, the jute, the cotton, to get to the precious lead core. It is dirty, dangerous work. The smell of rotting seaweed and old petrol fills the air. For the next 3 years, the salvage crews work tirelessly. They pull up miles of the steel Hamel pipes, which are sold as scrap to rebuild the bridges and railways of a shattered Europe. They reclaim the lead to make batteries and plumbing for the new council estates springing up across England. The Conundrums, those massive floating drums that once terrified tug captains, are towed back to shore. Some are scrapped, others are beached and abandoned, rusting skeletons left to confuse future generations of tourists who stumble upon them at low tide. 1948. The Institution of Civil Engineers, London. Arthur Clifford Hartley stands at a podium. The secrecy order has been lifted. For years, he couldn't tell his wife what he did during the day. He couldn't explain why he was meeting with admirals or why he smelled of oil and the sea. Now he presents a paper on the technical aspects of Operation Pluto. The room is full of his peers. Men who build bridges, dams, and skyscrapers. They listen in stunned silence as he details the sheer audacity of it. The 3-inch pipes, the 40-foot floating drums, the pressures of 1,500 psi. He explains how they laid 17 lines across the channel, how they pumped 1,000,000 gallons a day, how a team of ice cream factory workers and merchant sailors kept the heart of the Allied army beating. When he finishes, there is a pause. Then the applause begins. It is polite, reserved British applause, but the respect is absolute. Hartley steps down. He doesn't see himself as a hero. He sees himself as an engineer who was given a problem. "It is impossible," they had said. "It is merely difficult," he had replied. Present day. Sandown Bay, Isle of Wight. The ice cream factory is gone, replaced by a golf course and a zoo. The tourists walking the coastal path have no idea what lies beneath their feet. But if you go to Shanklin Chine, a deep green gorge cutting through the cliffs, you can still see it. Rusty, thick, and resolute, a section of 3-inch steel pipe juts out of the rock, pointing toward France. It is a scar of history, a remnant of the time when an eccentric engineer looked at a spool of telegraph wire and decided he could use it to fuel a liberation. The waves crash against the shore, just as they did in 1944. The ocean keeps its secrets well, but the pipeline remains, a silent testament to the ingenuity that turned the tide of the greatest war in history. The thread that stitched the wound of Europe back together.